One. Hello and welcome to another episode of Alastair's Academics. Today with a lovely student from FASOS, Zoe Pia, who will be speaking to us about an essay she wrote. So maybe you can introduce yourself and your research.
Yes. So hi, my name is Pia. I am an arts and culture student in my third year, so I'm writing my thesis next semester. And I wrote about ageism within the LGBTQ plus community, and also why that is an issue and where the issue comes from and how it is also represented in artworks.
So obviously it is quite a considerable issue that you hear a lot about. Maybe you'd like to expand on where you went with your research.
Yeah, so I started with the idea of just trying to see what ageism is and where it comes from within society. And sort of the consensus that you have in academia is that it starts somewhere around the 50s and 60s. So that with consumer culture and this idea of trying to optimize yourself and being as productive as possible, you have this issue that you're not longer trying to just sell a product, but you're selling a feeling. And then you're trying to optimize yourself, so you're selling the feeling of being better and becoming better through products. And then you trying to maximize life and also your health. And by that, you're saying that being then youthful and healthy is beautiful, is good, and then that also attributes a moral goodness to that youth and health. So maintaining your body is not just then something that you do because you would like to be fit or you would like to look better or look different in a way, but it's something that you do to comply with the standards that are set in society. And then when you're failing at being maintaining your body or being fit or whatever, that is seen as a sign of moral decline or that you're being immoral. And then that is where ageism comes in, because with age, you cannot really stop aging, but you try to do that through products, through creams, through activities, whatever. And if you can't do that, you're seen as being immoral or lazy, all of these things.
Now, obviously, this is quite a psychologically intense topic. It goes a lot to how we view ourselves and how others view us. But you approached it from a arts and culture background. Maybe you can expand on how your background gives you a different insight to the topic, but also to research on the LGBTQ community in general.
So I think if you would look at ageism from a more psychological perspective or medical perspective, you would look at the way elderly people feel or what impact it has on them. But from the social scientist perspective, arts and culture perspective, whatever you want to call it, so you try to look at where the issue itself, so the societal factors of ageism and also its impact on not just elderly people in general, but the LGBTQ plus community, where these things come from in society and then how they are reflected within arts, within culture, within cultural practices. And so it's in a way a broader approach that is not as focused on the individual but more on the societal ramifications.
That's very interesting, thank you. Maybe you'd like to expand for those at home who have just been bombarded with a very interesting topic, maybe more about what ageism is and how it manifests in the community.
Yeah, so ageism itself, if you want to have the basic definition of ageism, is just discrimination based on age. So, for example, there's one example that I read about that's quite telling, I think, where women talked about not dyeing their hair anymore and then being treated as people speaking loudly to them and treating them as if they're older, if they can't hear properly or can't do things for themselves anymore just because they have grey hair at that point. So ageism is not just saying, well, old age is not that good. It's also saying that it says that age is something that is not desirable and that hinders you in being yourself or expressing yourself to the fullest extent. and so how that is countered within society, or what the approach was within the 80s, 90s, and still is today, is that you have this idea if you can age successfully, which ties into this community consumer culture aspect, that you can counter these stereotypes of age that see age as something that is feared, that is you're dependent on someone, you're frail, all of these things, that you can counter that, and that you can remain a functioning human in a way, if you want to say it that drastically. And it's not just, so this successful aging then is not just the absence of diseases, it's also this being active and engaging on a broader level with society. So yeah, but what then the problem is with successful aging, and then we can already sort of move to the difficulties that ageism poses within the LGBTQ plus community, is that when you say that you can age successfully, that implies that the negative aging is still a thing, because you need the negative for the positive. So even if you try to say, well, you can age successfully and you can be an active person, even if you're over 80, that still says, well, but there's a possibility that you won't be active and mobile and whatever when you're 80.
And it also says that there's something wrong with that.
Yeah.
To be honest, when I get to 22, I just want to sit down and shut off. Why wouldn't an 80-year-old want to do that? Why is that wrong?
Exactly. And it's not, and then saying that that this negative aging is something that is bad, and then also you have ideas that then say, well, but they didn't live properly, so it's their fault that they have some sort of disease now. So it's also really judging.
And obviously this is a problem in society as a whole, but maybe you could narrow in as to why it's such a problem within the LGBTQ community.
Yeah, so what becomes interesting when you look at the LGBTQ plus community is that elderly LGBTQ plus people have an intersectional identity. So they're not just elderly people, and they're not just part of the LGBTQ plus community. They're both, and that brings difficult challenges that aren't really seen by one or the other group. So it's not just, you can't really just look at one part of their identity and not see the other one, because that would limit the struggles that they face. So then what happened within the LGBTQ plus community is that elderly people, everyone over the age of, let's say, 50, becomes sort of invisible. Older members of the society, of the community, have become unseen, not just in the ageism debate, but also in the LGBTQ plus debate. So, for example, if you an elderly member of the LGBTQ plus community is subjected to multiple forms of discrimination, but it's not just discrimination based on their sexuality or gender. It's also discrimination based on age, and then other factors can also come in as sexism, racism, all of these other aspects. And for example, within the community itself, what is something that is, for example, encountered by elderly gay men, is they feel excluded from the community because there's this negative stereotype of older gay men being predatory, which is interesting because that is usually something that is a homophobic stereotype that is used against the LGBTQ plus community as a whole, or gay men in general. But then it's also used by younger gay men against older gay men, and that shows that it's quite difficult within the community to create a community that includes both the younger and the older people. What also is part of this issue is that a lot of spaces that are dedicated to the LGBTQ plus community are, for example, bars and clubs, and those are usually for younger people. and then elderly members of the community feel excluded from that because they feel like they don't really belong there, they can't really participate, there's not really space for them there. And that is sort of the issues that they face within the LGBTQ plus community. But they also face issues within with other elderly people, because they might be, theoretically speaking, they might be more likely to be homophobic, to be really conservative. So they then, with people that are their age, they don't really feel like they can engage with them on the same level because they might reject them based on their sexuality or gender. So that is, yeah.
So how do we tackle this? Because what I'm hearing is we need gay care homes, but I'm not sure if that's the only solution.
There was actually, I read a few papers and articles that talked about that also elderly LGBTQ plus people, for example, trans people, need different sort of care when they're older than, for example, a cis person that is 80. But I think what we can do, or what is generally something that can be done, is this nice concept of embracing shame. And what that means is there's something shameful about age. I think that as this ageist debate shows, that age is seen as something that is feared, that is in a way sometimes described as disgusting even, and we don't want to go there, even though it's something that is, almost everyone wants to get old but doesn't want to be old. And then the LGBTQ plus community is traditionally also seen as something that is that goes against traditional values, that is sort of just doesn't belong, and if you want to say it that way. But what then embracing shame means is that these communities transgress certain boundaries within society, but that is not something that is bad, but that is something that has potential. Because by embracing shame, you're not trying to adhere to the same standard, or to you're not moving within the same discourse that creates these stereotypes. Because as we've seen with the successful aging, if you try to age successfully, you're still affirming that there's a negative side of aging. But instead, if you embrace the thing that makes you shameful, or that makes you different, if you want to, that gives you more potential, and it gives you something more than just you're not affirming the stereotypes, and you're more accepting yourself. And that is something that I think can be done by elderly LGBTQ plus members themselves. But what I saw when I looked at, for example, photographs, there are photographs that try to do that, this embracing shame idea, by portraying ones that I looked at were of trans women that were, I think, 60-ish. I'm not sure.
It's really awful if they turn out to be 40 now.
I think they were, at least they were labelled as being older, so kind of 30 plus. But what was nice there, that these photographs didn't really try to hide that they were not 20 anymore, but what they did was sort of, they highlighted that they were not young anymore, and that made it, that gave them almost this transgressive potential of showing, I'm not young anymore, but that is not something bad, that is who I am, that is okay, and I'm not trying to be like a 20-year-old.
So we have an audience question, which is from Thomas. Is there something that we can do as the younger gays? Thomas still calling himself younger.
I think what we can do is we can try to make the space as open as possible. I think that is just a general thing that we have to do, also in light of other people that are in the community, not just elderly people. But I didn't really look at that, but I think what's an idea that I've seen quite a lot online is that you have cafes, like LGBTQ plus friendly cafes where people could meet, so that you go away from this nightclub bar oriented thing and move towards more community based social activities. What is also an issue with the elderly LGBTQ plus community is that there are not that many left because of the AIDS epidemic in the 70s, 80s, and so on, because that almost eliminates an entire generation, which would be now the elderly LGBTQ plus part of, would now be the elderly part of the community.
Yeah, and I think that on that, it's quite impressive that as a community that is generally shunned from society, we do so well at shunning everyone within it.
Yeah.
But you said, and you brought up examples of photographs earlier, that obviously you approach this from a sociological perspective. Maybe you could speak of other examples you found in your research.
Yeah, so other examples that I've found from the that were, for example, from interviews where I can't remember the name of the researcher, but they conducted interviews with mainly elderly gay men. I don't know their age, but they were older, and talked to them and tried to find out how they feel excluded from the community and why. And they said quite overwhelmingly that they think that the younger people don't really want to have anything to do with them. They don't really want to engage with them, and that they don't really feel like there's any space for them within the community. So with the example with the clubs and bars, that they don't really feel like they should be there. That is a space for young people. That is also, a lot of them felt like these bars seen as related to sex, so they felt, well, I don't really belong there anymore because I'm old. And that is also a stereotype with ageism, that you can't, that elderly people don't really have sex anymore. That is something that is completely not part of their life anymore. And what was interesting within these interviews, when then in comparison with other younger people, is that the younger people sometimes felt like the elderly people were judging them because the elderly members might have more traditional views, or they might not like their approach to being gay and being out and proud, and some of the elderly people might have this idea of trying to be covered, and being gay is not something that you should be proud of. So there was also this, what then came was this discrepancy between the young people feeling like the older people didn't want to be with them, and the older people feeling like they were judged and there was no space for them within the community.
And I think that's a very interesting point, because when you think of the gay community not as a community but as like who does what in it, you think of the young bratty twinks that annoy everyone and the old men that are in charge of everything. And I think then you go, well, actually, there is definitely a problem with ageism in that there are these two groups that have somehow consumed all of the power of, like, oh, this is what it means to be gay, and, well, they're in charge of everything, so they are kind of in charge of everything. But I feel like you spoke earlier about the importance of intersectional examination of this. I think it needs to be looked at in a more intersectional light, because actually ageism for a white gay man is probably very, very different than for a person of colour or a trans person, because actually those people are already, in the worst way possible, sidelined within the gay community to some extent.
That is, I think that's a really important point, because there was also something I was quite disappointed by that when I looked for literature for the topic, because most of the literature was about LGB members of the community, so even dropping the T completely, and then mainly talking about gay men. So I thought that is quite, that it excludes a lot of other people within the community, that face ageism and that face other discrimination, and that might face ageism even more extremely than gay men.
And I think especially, sorry, did you want to continue?
No, it's fine.
Sorry, I felt like I was cutting you off. But when you look at the ageism discussion within straight men and straight women, you see generally a very negative stereotype surrounding older women. But if you look at George Clooney, and yes, that's an example of aging well, but you see a much more positive light on your, oh yes, they really grow into their age. And if you're then looking at the problem through this very specific lens, but only looking at it with regards to men in predominance, you then almost reinforce this, well, actually, society already dictates that they age better than everyone else as some form of social construct. So we're reinforcing the fact that, look, here's the problem. Well, what are we excluding in that? So it seems like you've identified a big problem and tried to bring some solutions. Moving forwards, do you want to pursue research in this area further?
I think it would be really interesting to look at it further because I think with arts and culture you can really. So I would like to focus later on arts and philosophy mainly, and how the master that I want to do is more about science and technology. But I still think it's really interesting to see how art and philosophy react to social challenges and sort of try to portray that. Because, for example, with the photographs, that was done. These photos were done by a gay man, and I thought it was quite interesting to see how from that perspective it was the issue of age was approached, but then again it was these photographs were done by a white younger gay man and not by an elderly trans person, for example, of color, which would have been more interesting because that would have reflected the models themselves. But yeah, I think it would be quite interesting to go to further go in that direction and see how how ageism, how what challenges the LGBTQ plus community faces, and how that is reflected in art and philosophy and all these other areas of society.
And I think in that because also how the artist reflects their own internal struggle almost through their artwork and their depiction of it, which I think is a very valid point, given that it seems white, gay, young, maybe slightly older men seem to get all the fun. And I'm like, no, we're the gay community, look at us, white, old, like, you can just pretend. We'll stand in this board photo. You can pretend we're straight. And I mean, obviously, you've spoken a lot about it, but what do you find that your main takeaways were from this?
I think my main takeaway is that on one hand, there is a big ageism problem within the LGBTQ plus society, but I think that was quite clear for me when I started. Because as you said, the LGBTQ plus community tries to be as accepting and open and broad, but we're quite good at excluding others from within that community. But for me, what the main takeaway was that while elderly LGBTQ plus members, people face different problems based on their intersection identity, that there is sort of not just the potential that we as a community have to include them, but they also have the potential themselves to be not positive, but to embrace this sort of, for lack of a better word, shameful identity, even though it's not shameful, but to embrace this identity that is seen as shameful and use that and feel that way, feel empowered. So I think in that way, it was quite interesting research to do. Also because another takeaway for me was that the literature on this topic is quite focused on white gay men and maybe one or two lesbians, but
that's the LGBT community, haven't you heard? White gay men and the honorary lesbian. But I think that is that for me, hearing you speak would be almost the most interesting takeaway. The fact that a lot of it not only is but imposed by the broader community, but also that there is such an almost internalized aspect of this response. And Thomas is speaking of us now in the past tense, telling us we were brilliant. But I mean, I think that suggests that I should let you get back to your weekend.
Yeah.
And obviously then your holidays, because
I'm really looking forward to them.
Yeah. So thank you very much for being our last guest of 2020, and I have thoroughly enjoyed it.
Thank you for having me. It was really nice to be here.